Hey folks, tonight we're casting off from the comfort of your room and drifting gently into a time when the seas were as much a mystery as the stars above them. Imagine it now, the rhythmic lap of water against warped wooden hulls, the faint squeak of pulleys overhead, and a salty breeze sliding past your cheeks like the breath of an old sailor, telling tales no one believes anymore. We're headed back to the medieval era, when the seas weren't ruled by titanic navies or ships with names like Invincible, but by small crews, cramped decks, and a lot of very grumpy sailors who just wanted a dry biscuit. As you settle in, let your mind unfurl like a sail. Picture medieval docks before sunrise. Lanterns bob, thick with fog and fish guts. The air smells of brine, rotting rope, and something vaguely like cabbage stew that's been forgotten in a bucket. Dock workers cough. Cats dart. A naval captain paces on the pier, boots heavy with mud, thinking not of glory, but of supplies. If the salted meat goes bad again, there will be a riot below deck. This, surprisingly, is how most sea battles began, not with swords drawn, but with logistics. Before cannon blasts and pirate ambushes, there were problems with rats, big ones, and leaks. Ropes that frayed just as the crew started pulling them. Medieval naval crews weren't trained like modern soldiers. They were often fishermen or conscripted peasants who learned to tie knots the same week they were told to fight pirates. Naval vessels, if we can even call them, that were rarely standardized. Some were repurposed merchant ships with added platforms. Others were longships with a few iron nails pounded into the sides, as if that would really stop an arrow. The sails? Patchwork? The weapons? Rusty? The sailors? Seasick. On the other side of things, pirates weren't much better off, at least. Not yet. In these early centuries, most pirates didn't have their own famous ships or treasure maps inked on weathered vellum. They weren't famous, flamboyant figures. They were desperate men, sometimes escaped serfs, outlaws, or even former Navy men sneaking aboard smaller coastal boats or waiting in hidden coves for fat merchant vessels to pass. But oh, how still and quiet it was just before the clash. Picture the gray sea at dawn. The sails are drawn tight. No one's talking. Every creak of wood makes your heart skip. The cook has tied down his pots. The crew has sharpened their boarding axes. A lookout squints through fog that smells faintly like a damp sheepdog. And there, far off, a darker smudge on the horizon. Maybe it's just a shadow. Maybe it's a storm cloud. But no, it's sails too small for a merchant. Too quick. A pirate galley rowing fast. Suddenly, everything that had been slow and sleepy erupts. Orders are shouted. Men stumble across slick decks. The captain's voice is barely heard over the rising wind. One sailor ties his shoes to the mast. He swears it's good luck. Another one nervously fingers a wooden carving of St. Brendan, muttering about sea demons. And just like that, battle is near. But for now, let's stay in this moment, the pause before the storm. It's where most sailors lived, really. In that long stretch of waiting. Not in constant violence, but in endless preparation for a fight that may or may not come. Funny enough, the biggest threats weren't always other ships. A broken rudder could strand a crew for days. A spoiled barrel of drinking water could kill more men than arrows ever did. One medieval captain wrote that the worst beast of the sea is the uncheerful loaf. No one knew what he meant, but it probably involved mold. Despite the grim reputation of pirates and the noble posturing of navies, life at sea in the Middle Ages was remarkably ... boring. And that's where the real drama was. Endless sky, repetitive chores, and a sense that the sea might just go on forever. Like now, perhaps, if you close your eyes and listen to the rhythm of waves against the hull of time. Aboard the ship, the deckhands begin to hum a low chant, part work song, part lullaby. It's in no known language, just syllables passed down by men who needed to keep their hands busy and their minds off the edge of the world. Below deck, someone snores. The rats rustle near the grain sacks. Somewhere off the bow, a gull calls and is ignored. And that, dear listener, is where our journey truly begins, not with clash or cannon, but with creaking wood, fog-dimmed mornings, and a crew quietly wondering what waits beyond the waves. Out there, drifting on the horizon, were not just ships, but shadows, ghosts with sails, shapes that disappeared when stared at too hard. In the early medieval centuries, pirates didn't yet fly Jolly Rogers or wear coats with dozens of shiny buttons. Those familiar pirate cliches would come much later, after gunpowder and stage plays rewrote history with a wink. The medieval pirate? Much less theatrical and far more unpredictable. Imagine a narrow, flat-bottomed ship hugging the coastline, its crew wrapped in ragged cloaks. No parrots here, unless one had wandered on board by accident and was swiftly eaten. These pirates didn't care for flair. They valued speed and stealth. Their sails were patched, their oars silent, and their knives always within reach. Many didn't even call themselves pirates. They were just sea raiders, privateers, or, in some cases, tacksmen with swords. Some came from the coasts of North Africa, striking fear into ships near Sicily and Spain. Others haunted the Baltic Scandinavian bandits with names like Björn the Black and Eric Stickfinger. These men rarely spoke the same language as their prey, but they spoke in loot, cloth, salted fish, wine, a decent pair of boots. They weren't picky. And these pirates were seasonal. Unlike the romantic idea of endless plunder, many only raided in the warmer months. Winter meant ice, storms, and boredom. So come spring, the seas would churn not with whales, but with hungry, desperate men who knew the tides better than they knew their own families. Now, let's meet a few. Picture Ralph of Normandy, known for raiding monasteries along the English coast. He had a reputation for capturing monks and ransoming them back for cheese. Just cheese. Historians suspect he might have had dental issues, or just really loved camembert. Or take a fellow named Diego the Whisper, a Catalan pirate who attacked only at night and left notes behind saying, "Nice try. Better locks next time." He may have been real, or just a sea tale passed around like a bottle of spoiled wine. But regardless of their names, medieval pirates were united by one simple truth: no rules at sea. Out there, morality bent like a storm-torn mast. They'd scavenge, sabotage, or even join your crew if the wind was right. Some would pretend to be traders, get invited aboard, and then, bam, your captain is overboard, and someone else is steering your ship. And speaking of deception, pirate tactics weren't just brute force. Oh no, many relied on clever tricks. A favorite one? Sailing under a false flag. It was common for pirates to mimic the banners of nearby kingdoms. A ship flying the English Lion might be full of French pirates, or vice versa. By the time anyone got close enough to see the trick, the ambush had already begun. Others used silence as a weapon. They'd soak the oars to avoid creaks, wrap their boots in cloth, even muzzle the ship's dog. But despite their tricks and tactics, pirates weren't invincible. They were deeply vulnerable to storms, starvation, and their own infighting. Many ships fell apart not from battles, but from bad decisions and worse hygiene. One misstep near a rocky shore could doom the whole crew. One bad oyster, and you're buried at sea with your pants stolen by the cabin boy. In fact, piracy wasn't always a long-term gig. Most pirates didn't retire rich. They retired dead. Or, if lucky, they melted back into the towns they once raided, cutting their beards and pretending they'd always been blacksmiths. Some even switched sides, joining navies as informants or guides. The sea has a funny way of turning friends into enemies, and back again, depending on the size of your coin purse. And for all their danger, many pirates were oddly polite. Some left notes thanking ship captains for not resisting too hard. A few had codes of honor, sharing loot equally, and punishing anyone who struck a fellow crewman unnecessarily. One pirate even famously banned whistling on board, said it called storms and tempted the spirits. The penalty? Scrubbing the deck with eel guts. Effective, if a bit over the top. So yes, before the parrots and pistols, pirates were already legends. Not for their charisma, but for their nerve. Small crews, no backup, rowing straight toward ships twice their size, knowing they had nothing to lose, and maybe, just maybe, a crate of something better than sea biscuits to gain. And as we drift gently forward in this story, keep that image close. A faint shape on the horizon, the sound of distant oars, the smell of wet rope and old fish. Because where there were sailors, there were pirates lurking, not always with swords, but always with patience. It was the fear of these silent shadows that made sailors sleep with one eye open, even when anchored safely in port. After all, you never knew if your cook used to be a pirate, or your captain, or the man cleaning your boots who just smiled a little too much. Let's lower ourselves now onto the rough, splintery deck of a medieval ship, not in the middle of battle, but during the quiet hours of a long day at sea. Here, the air is thick with sweat, salt, and the constant tension of close quarters. You'd expect the life of a medieval sailor or a pirate to be a thrilling string of adventures. But in truth, most days were little more than a soggy grind. Routine ruled everything, right down to the sour smell of damp wool. Imagine waking up before dawn in the low-ceilinged belly of a ship. The hammocks sway like restless ghosts. Rats dart across beams above your head, bold and fat from shared biscuits. There's no sun yet, just a dull orange glow creeping up the sides of the ship's planks. The first voice you hear is probably someone cursing about the cold, or the smell, or the fact that they accidentally drank lamp oil instead of watered-down wine again. Whether you were a sailor on a state vessel or a member of a pirate crew, your day began with movement hauling ropes, checking sails, fixing whatever broke overnight, and bailing out water. Always water. Medieval ships leaped like gossip in a tavern. The crew's hands were never dry. Breakfast? Don't expect flapjacks and bacon. More likely, a slab of hardtack, a kind of sailor's bread with the texture of broken roof tile. If you were lucky, it hadn't gone moldy. If you were really lucky, you found only one weevil inside. And yes, most sailors just ate the weevils. Extra protein, crunchy. Then came the chores, scrubbing the deck, cleaning chamber pots, oiling weapons, tending to the sails. Even pirates kept a surprisingly orderly ship. After all, if your deck is covered in eel slime and dirty boots, you're one slippery lunge away from falling into shark-infested waters. Not exactly a heroic end. Pirates, contrary to their lawless reputation, often operated with strict routines. Captains maintained a code-clean gear, ready weapons, and no fighting below deck. Some crews held daily meetings where loot was divided, plans were made, and occasionally, someone was sentenced to sleep next to the pigs as punishment for stealing a crewmate's soap. Naval sailors lived under more rigid orders with a clear chain of command. Still, many of them envied pirates. Pirates elected their captains. They voted. Sailors in the Navy obeyed without question, often under officers who'd never sailed a day in their lives. The stories of cruel commanders were endless, like Sir Alduin the Thinner, who once had a man whipped for blinking during an inspection. Twice. Life at sea was also loud. Constant creaks, groans, and the slap of waves against the hull. Add to that the shouting of men, the grumbles of seasick passengers, and the occasional sea shanty about a goat that fell in love with a barrel, and you had a kind of salty chaos that never fully paused. Yet, in all this noise, there were also odd little moments of peace. A game of dice played in whispers. A shared cup of warmed wine clinked against the rail. a sailor carving a tiny mermaid into the wood near his sleeping spot, one careful scratch at a time. Some pirates told stories late into the night, not just of treasure, but of strange lights on the horizon, ghost ships, or the mythical island where every sailor's lost sock ends up. And then there were the smells. Oh, the smells. Picture sour sweat, fish guts, tar, seaweed, and the lingering perfume of dried beans oiling in seawater. One traveler described the smell below deck as a stew of wet boots and fear. Charming. Weather added its own moods. Rain turned everything to mud. Wind could snap a mast in two. But worst of all was the calm sea, the dreaded dead water. No wind, no movement. Just heat, thirst, and a maddening stillness that made men squint at the horizon and wonder if the world had ended without telling them. Still, both sailors and pirates adapted. They told jokes, even if they weren't very good. They kept charms around their necks, coins with holes, bones from lucky birds, or in one case, a locket containing what was definitely just a rock, but was considered sacred by 3 generations of deckhands. And of course, there were the songs. Always the songs. Rowing songs, work songs, drinking songs, songs about mythical sea beasts and scandalous innkeepers, and the moon's apparent habit of stealing socks from drying lines. Music made the day go faster, or at least feel like something other than an endless tangle of rope and rain. By nightfall, the ship was quieter, lit only by lanterns swinging in rhythm with the waves. A few men snored. One scribbled in a tiny book he swore no one could read. Another sharpened a dagger that he only used for cutting cheese, but still wanted to keep menacing. The sea shimmered in the moonlight, vast and unknowable, and for a moment, even pirates stared into it as if it held secrets meant just for them. And in those quiet, creaking nights, life at sea boring, cramped, and endlessly damp felt almost sacred. When we think of sea battles today, we often picture thunderous cannon fire and smoke curling from iron muzzles. But back in the medieval era, before gunpowder ruled the waves combat at sea, was an entirely different affair. It was slower, sweatier, and far more up close. Medieval naval battles weren't decided at long range. They were settled by grappling hooks, clattering footsteps on slick decks, and the sort of weaponry that looked suspiciously like repurposed farming tools. Let's start with the basics. If you were a medieval sailor heading into combat, chances are your arsenal wasn't glamorous. Crossbows were highly valued. They didn't require much training, and a well-placed bolt could send a message loud and clear. But they were heavy, slow to reload, and about as graceful as a sack of turnips. Archers had more speed, but the sea breeze loved to carry arrows astray. So what did many rely on? Fire pots. Yes, that's right, clay pots filled with burning pitch or oil, hurled onto enemy decks. Think of them as medieval Molotov cocktails, but with more smoke and a greater chance of setting your own beard on fire. And if the fire didn't work, well, you boarded them. You threw out grappling hooks, reeled in the enemy ship like a reluctant fish, and then climbed aboard yelling, tripping, slipping, and swinging axes, swords, and sometimes just very aggressive broomsticks. It was chaos, not the neat, swashbuckling kind, but the loud, elbow-in-your-eye sort of brawl you'd find in a drunken medieval tavern, ... except with more splinters and more people falling into the sea. Boarding tools were simple, but terrifying. The boarding axe was a favorite, short, sharp, and made for cracking open hatches, skulls and barrels. There were long poles with metal hooks for pulling enemy sailors off their feet. Some ships carried stink pots, ceramic containers filled with rotting substances, set alight and lobbed at enemy decks. The smoke was thick, choking, and smelled like a goat's worst nightmare. Effective? Absolutely. Pleasant? Not remotely. Of course, every sailor dreamed of the perfect weapon. One Italian ship tried to develop a water scythe, a long pole with blades that could be spun through the water to damage enemy hulls. It didn't work. It mostly just scared dolphins, but creativity flourished. One pirate crew once launched bees in clay, jars an attack that worked surprisingly well until the wind shifted and the bees decided to return to their senders. But more than weapons, battles relied on fear. The idea of being boarded, of suddenly facing dirty, screaming men swinging hooked blades, was often enough to break morale before the first clash. Ships would surrender without a fight, especially if they were merchant vessels with terrified crews whose only combat experience was arguing over fish prices. To boost courage, naval captains employed all sorts of tricks. Painted eyes on the prow of the ship to watch the enemy, war drums to unsettle opponents, and my personal favorite, a naval commander who made his crew wear exaggerated masks of monstrous faces. The goal? Terrify their enemies into thinking they were demons from the deep. It worked once. Then everyone realized it was just Sven in a badly carved pumpkin helmet. Armor, when worn, was mostly leather or chainmail, though many sailors opted to wear next to nothing in battle. Less to snag on ropes, and less to drag them down if they went overboard. Some simply tied knives to their wrists and hoped for the best. Helmets? Optional. Unless you were the captain, in which case you'd probably wear a fancy, plumed hat that doubled as a sea marker if your body washed ashore. The environment itself was as dangerous as the enemy. A wave at the wrong moment could send you tumbling. Slippery decks, swinging sails, and panicked chickens. Yes, chickens could cause as much injury as any sword. One well-documented battle ended early when a goat got loose on the deck, kicked over a barrel of firepots, and set the ship ablaze before either side made contact. The goat survived. The ship didn't. Still, there was strategy. Ships tried to maneuver for the windward side, giving archers the advantage. Commanders timed their approach with the sun behind them, blinding their opponents. Pirates often attacked from the shadows, using coastal inlets and fog banks to mask their approach. They'd lower sails, row silently, and strike just before dawn, when the enemy was sleepiest and least likely to remember where they put their boots. And of course, the sea decided everything. A sudden squall could sink both ships mid-fight. A shifting tide might separate allies or drive a victorious ship straight onto the rocks. In many battles, no one won. Both crews limped away, wounded and wiser, ready to tell stories about the glorious battle they definitely won. Probably. But amid the terror and smoke and flailing limbs, there were also strange moments of civility. A pirate might spare a ship if the crew played a decent sea shanty. A naval captain might trade medical supplies for a bottle of stolen wine. One battle even paused for 2 hours, while both crews helped each other extinguish a fire before resuming their attempted murder. It was, in every sense, a strange theater, primitive, wet, and profoundly human. The moment came not with cannon fire or trumpet blasts, but with a jolt, a crunch, and the unmistakable shriek of wood scraping against wood. Two ships locked together like startled animals. This was the real moment of combat in medieval sea battles, boarding. You've heard the phrase before, but forget the smooth, cinematic leaps of modern movies. Boarding was not graceful. It was messy, terrifying, and often accidental. Ships didn't always collide on purpose. Sometimes the wind failed, or the waves did the work, slamming two hulls together like slow-motion battering rams. But when it happened, all thoughts of strategy vanished. It became about who could scramble across the planks first without falling into the frothing sea below. The first thing that would fly were the hooks large, iron-tipped grappling tools flung across the short, shrinking distance between the ships. The hooks bit into enemy rails and rigging with a hungry clatter. Then ropes were hauled tight, yanking the two ships closer and closer until the decks almost kissed. And just like that, you had a very personal war. Imagine it. A creak and groan of two ships pulling together, rigging snapping overhead, the cries of men as they leap across. There's no formation, no elegant swordplay, just a chaotic shuffle of boots on wet timber. You've got one hand on a dagger and one on the rail. You're hoping you don't slip in that puddle of soup someone spilled earlier. This was when the most important tool on board came into play, not the axe or the sword, but the plank. Long wooden planks, hastily laid between ships to allow warriors to charge across. Of course, charge might be generous. Many just crawled. The smarter ones slid on their bellies. Falling meant drowning. Most of these men couldn't swim. Their armor was heavy, their boots were soaked, and the sea was unforgiving. On pirate vessels, everyone boarded. Cooks, riggers, even the guy who cleaned the latrine. Naval ships were more organized, with designated fighters, but desperation made everyone a soldier eventually. And since medieval ships rarely had decks large enough for proper sword fights, weapons clashed inches apart. Elbows were thrown. Teeth were used. One sailor reportedly fought with a ladle and won. In the din of boarding, the environment became an enemy too. Masts swung wildly. Ropes tangled around ankles. Crates slid, barrels rolled, chickens screamed. Visibility was low smoke from firepots, oil, and fog often reduced vision to arm's length. You might not know whether you were stabbing a pirate or your own crewmate until someone shouted your name in confusion. The chaos created moments of strange absurdity. One legend tells of a pirate who leapt aboard a Navy vessel, only to land directly in the captain's stew pot. Another story describes a sailor hiding inside a barrel for the entire fight, emerging only to claim he had guarded the pickles. But don't let the humor fool you, boarding was brutal. Many fighters died not from wounds, but from falling. One slip, one bad step, and it was into the waves. The sea swallowed quietly. You'd be gone in seconds. Once aboard, the goal was to take control of the enemy's helm, capture the captain if possible, and secure the ship's valuables. Sometimes the fight ended quickly, the defending crew overwhelmed, throwing down weapons and begging for quarter. Other times, it dragged on for hours. Ships caught in deadly embraces, drifting with the tide as the battle waged on their backs. Surrender was not guaranteed safety. Pirates might spare a crew, or they might not. It depended on mood, loot, and whether the victors were feeling philosophical. Some battles ended with a handshake and a jug of wine shared between exhausted captains. Others ended with tied-up survivors, pushed into lifeboats if they were lucky. But perhaps the strangest part of boarding battles? The quiet moments in between. A sudden lull when both sides hesitated. A pause while someone retrieved a dropped weapon. One documented incident even describes a ceasefire when a goat gave birth mid-fight. Both crews watched in silence. The kid was named Peace, and later stolen by the pirate cook. Victory wasn't always about killing. Sometimes it was about outlasting. Who had the stronger arms to pull the ropes tighter? Who could hold their footing longer? Who had the nastier soup to fling in someone's face? It was a strange dance of proximity, improvisation, and sheer nerve. And there were customs. If pirates won, they often nailed their flag to the captured ship's mast. If naval forces won, the pirate ship was usually set ablaze. No mercy, no second chances. Though, on occasion, a clever pirate might beg to be kept alive, offering maps, secrets, or the name of a rival pirate crew that just might be hiding behind the next island. In the end, the battle faded not with a bang, but with a whimper. The last cry of a man slipping into the waves, the soft thud of dropped weapons, the heavy breathing of those left standing. The sea, which had watched silently the whole time, resumed its rhythm, unimpressed by the blood and broken wood now bobbing on its surface. And when the ship finally drifted away, free again, all that was left of the fight was a few bloodstains, a snapped mast, and maybe if they were lucky a new set of boots from the defeated captain's wardrobe, because nothing said victory quite like dry socks. With the clash of boarding battles still echoing in your mind, let's now pull back and drift higher up into the salty wind above the sails, where we can see not just the violence, but the dance beneath it. Because believe it or not, medieval naval combat wasn't always a chaotic scramble. Behind the madness, there was method, tactics, sea chess, if you will. Only every piece wobbled, leaked, and complained about rations. While most medieval ships were built for transport, not battle commanders still found creative ways to squeeze strategy from their creaking, tar-smelling vessels. It wasn't about brute strength. It was about position, deception, and knowing the sea better than your enemy. One of the most important rules: wind is everything. In an age before engines, your sail was your soul. To have the wind meant you controlled the pace, the angle, the chase. Pirates often attacked with the wind at their backs, not for drama, but because it gave them the speed to choose their moment. A smart naval commander always tried to approach from windward upwind of the enemy. That way, they could dictate whether to fight, flee, or float ominously while making dramatic eye contact. And then came formation. Medieval fleets didn't always travel in perfect lines, but they had their methods. A favored tactic was the crescent, where faster ships flanked wider vessels, trapping enemy ships in a tightening arc. Think of it as a slow-motion hug of doom. It was especially effective against pirates, who usually traveled in smaller, faster packs. Of course, pirates had tricks too. A classic move was the feigned retreat. A pirate ship, pretending to flee in panic, would lure a naval vessel into a narrow channel or hidden shoal, where a second ship waited behind the rocks, silent as a cat. Naval commanders fell for this again and again. Pride is a powerful thing. No one wanted to return to port and admit they were outwitted by a boat named Sea Potato. There were signals too. No radios, obviously so. Ships used flags, torches, and even trumpet calls to coordinate attacks. One famous fleet tied red cloth to their sails during combat to avoid confusion. Another painted their ships bright yellow, which helped with visibility, but unfortunately made them look like floating lemons. Some commanders got extremely creative. A Genoese admiral once launched barrels full of bees at pirate ships. The logic? They cannot row while being stung. It worked exactly once. Another time, an English captain ordered all men to dye their tunics blood red, to frighten the enemy with their bloodlust. In truth, it mostly just made laundry day impossible. Tactics weren't limited to ships. The shoreline was a weapon too. Pirates knew every cove, every reef, every sudden sandbar, ready to gut an unknowing vessel. They'd anchor just inside a fog bank, or near the mouth of a river, where passing ships would slow naturally and become perfect targets. These were called ambush tides, more a game of timing than strength. On longer voyages, naval fleets set watches at night lookouts in the crow's nests, listening not just for enemy sails, but for silence. Silence was suspicious. Too quiet meant someone was sneaking. One chronicler described the quietest hours being the ones that made the stomach turn cold. That might have been fear or the eel stew served at midnight. If you were lucky enough to spot a pirate before they reached you, and if you had a well-trained crew, and if the wind agreed, and if your rudder hadn't just snapped again, then you might attempt a preemptive strike. Shoot arrows first. Set their sail on fire. Throw a firepot. Or, if you were desperate, just yell very convincingly. Defensive tactics were no less inventive. Some ships dangled nets over their sides to tangle incoming grappling hooks. Others placed barrels of water on deck to extinguish fires fast. And some simply sailed in pairs, hoping that two broken ships were better than one. There was also a social tactic, reputation. The sea world was small. News traveled. A pirate ship known for torturing captives might find itself attacked more viciously. A Navy captain rumored to offer mercy might coax surrender without bloodshed. Reputation shaped strategy. What a ship meant could be as powerful as what it could do. And in between these skirmishes and ploys, there was waiting. Hours of drifting, watching the horizon, adjusting sails, listening to the groan of the wood. It was during these quiet times that strategies were whispered, oaths were sworn, and new tricks were imagined. Like the crew that pretended their ship was a flame smoke pouring from tarred claws only to attack the rescuers. Bold, risky, surprisingly effective. Sometimes tactics failed, famously, like the pirate captain who painted his ship black and declared it invisible at night. It wasn't, or the fleet that tried to disguise themselves as a floating wedding party, complete with a harpist. They forgot that harpists can't row. But often, even clever tactics gave way to raw human reaction. The sea had no time for perfect plans. It rolled and rose and slapped sails like a drunk uncle at a festival. What mattered was who adapted fastest. A crew member might spot an unguarded rope and swing across. A captain might notice the wind shift mid-fight and turn the tide literally. It wasn't chess. It was jazz. Wet, loud, dangerous jazz. And beneath it all, strategy gave sailors one thing above all: hope. The sense that maybe, if they were clever enough, quick enough, strange enough, they might just sail home again. Close your eyes now and imagine the wind gone. No breeze, no birds, just the heavy breath of a still ocean at dawn. The water is oily and motionless, like it's holding its breath. Then, from the fog crack, a shout, the scrape of hull against hull. A pirate raid has begun, not in a grand naval battle, but in a series of sharp, breathless moments. Let's place ourselves aboard a merchant cog one of those stubby, round-bellied ships favored in the late medieval period. She's old, a little leaky, her crew more familiar with counting crates than drawing swords. Her name is Elder Moon, painted carefully on the stern in faded gold. The voyage has been long, full of spoiled cabbages and stormy nights, but land is near. You can almost taste the shore bread. Then the lookout whispers it. Sails. To your left, rising like dark wings through the mist, are two smaller vessels. Low, sleek, too fast for traders, too quiet for fishermen. Their sails are patchy, their hulls smeared with tar to dampen any shine. No flags, no sound. They don't need to speak. You already know who they are. The pirates are here. The captain yells for weapons, but you all know the truth. This isn't a warship. The ship's one crossbow is lashed under a barrel of onions, and the cook refuses to come on deck without his apron. Still, you scramble. Anything becomes a weapon: oars, sticks, a mug still warm with tea. The pirates close in fast. One angles toward the rudder, the other veers toward the bow. They're not trying to sink Elder Moon. No point. They want her cargo. The cheese, the wool, maybe even the candles. And they want it fast. With a soft thud, their hooks land. Ropes tighten. You can hear them now, boots on wood, hushed instructions. Then, all at once, a roar. They surge aboard like rats on a larder, half shouting, half laughing. Their weapons aren't polished, but they gleam with use. One man wields a curved blade that looks suspiciously like a broken scythe. Another has a hammer with a chicken feather tied to the handle. For luck. You try to fight. Really, you do. You raise a bucket lid like a shield and swing an oar at the nearest figure. He ducks, winks, and taps your arm with the flat of his blade. Nice try, he mutters, then moves on. The rest of the crew fares no better. It's not even really a battle. It's more like a mugging at sea. Within minutes, the pirates control the deck. Your captain is red-faced and panting, held at sword point by a woman with more earrings than teeth. She's grinning, but not cruelly. "Where's the soap?" she asks. "We heard you have decent soap." That's the strange thing. There's no blood yet. These pirates don't want a massacre. They want efficiency. They tie you up. They shout for barrels to be rolled out. A young pirate pokes through your supplies and pockets a dried lemon with great reverence. "Haven't had citrus in months," he whispers, before tucking it carefully into a pouch already full of seashells and feathers. Then a shout from below deck. The crew froze. The pirates pause. One of their own has found a barrel full of something unexpected spices. Expensive, fragrant, rare. One pirate starts to cry. And just like that, the tone shifts. The leader offers you a trade. They'll leave your ship intact. They'll even leave enough food for the voyage home. In return, you forget you saw them. You tell the harbor officials you hit a storm. Maybe a mermaid stole your cargo. Anything but pirates. Your captain nods. The woman unties your hands herself and hands you back your bucket lid. "Keep it," she says. "Not bad for defense. Just work on your aim." They're gone as quickly as they came. The ropes slither off the rails, the sails snap open, and the pirate ships vanish into the mist like a dream interrupted. You stand on the deck of your plundered cog, still warm with their footprints, wondering if it really happened. And here's the truth. Most medieval pirate attacks looked exactly like this. Not traumatic, not deadly, but surprisingly mundane. They weren't always tales of bravery or horror. Often they were business. Quiet, tense, smelly business. Of course, not every pirate raid ended so gently. Some crews were merciless. If you resisted, they made examples. A sailor tossed overboard with his boots tied together. A mast carved with the message, "Next time, surrender faster." But even then, there was a rhythm to the violence. It wasn't random. It was precise, calculated. After the pirates left, the Elder Moon limped into port 2 days later. Her cargo lighter, her crew rattled, but alive. The port officials gave knowing looks. No one asked too many questions. And life continued. But some of the crew were changed. One sailor your friend, the one with the mug, spoke often of the woman pirate. Her grin, her kindness, her threat. A year later, he vanished. Rumor said he joined her, took the name Cabbage Jim. No one confirmed it. That's the hidden truth of these old sea raids. They weren't grand tales of evil and good. They were awkward, intimate, and strangely human. A pirate raid was not a thunderstorm. It was a quiet burglary with water on all sides and no chance to run. And for many sailors, that was the real terror, not dying. Just being caught in a moment where nothing you did mattered, where the waves held the only score, and all you could do was wait and hope, and remember how to smile when they told you it was over. By now, you may be wondering, how did it all start? What turned ordinary sailors or tradesmen into pirates in the first place? Was it greed? Rebellion? A dramatic monologue about freedom shouted into the wind? No, not quite. The real answer is much more boring and much more human. Life was hard, and the sea offered options. Let's sail back in time to the docks of a medieval coastal town. Stone streets, crates stacked with salted fish, donkeys pulling carts piled high with firewood and nettles. The local tavern smells like spilled ale, boiled onions, and regret. And out behind it, leaning against a moldy wall, is a sailor named Tobin. Tobin's boots have holes. He hasn't been paid in 3 months. His last voyage ended with half the cargo lost to rats, and the other half accidentally sold by the captain. Tobin's ship was seized by a tax collector the moment they returned, and now he's out of work. Again, enter a man in a brown hood, speaking in low tones. He knows a ship, a fast one. No questions asked. Decent food. Fair shares. And they might just be headed to intercept a rich merchant vessel traveling the coast next week. Tobin hesitates, then shrugs. Because honestly, What's the difference between starving on land and risking his life at sea, if the payout means never working? Another miserable winter on the docks? This is how it began for many medieval pirates. Not with a grand plan, but a slow slide, a few bad harvests, an unfair captain, a life spent being told where to stand and what to carry. Piracy wasn't always a choice, it was often an escape. Some were soldiers left unpaid after wars. Others were fishermen who lost their boats to storms or taxes. And many were criminals exiled from towns who had nowhere left to go. The sea didn't ask for a resume. It only asked if you could haul rope and keep your mouth shut. Entire coastal communities sometimes turned pirate, not out of wickedness, but desperation. In places like the Barbary Coast, piracy became woven into the fabric of survival. Some towns thrived entirely off stolen goods and ransom payments. It wasn't glamorous. It was just what paid the bills. And pirate crews were more democratic than most governments of the day. They voted on leadership, shared plunder evenly. They had rules, real written rules. Break them, and you'd lose your share. Or worse, be marooned, left on a rock with a jug of water, a knife, and your regrets. But joining a pirate crew came with risks. If caught by a navy or city patrol, you could be hanged, or branded, or sent to row in the galleys until your back gave out. Still, many took the chance. For every pirate that ended up in chains, 2 more slipped away with new boots and a coin-stuffed pouch. And not all pirates were men. Though rare, women sailed the seas too, sometimes disguised, sometimes boldly themselves. Annika of Bruges disguised herself as a mute boy for 3 years before being discovered. When confronted, she reportedly said, "Well, I was a better sailor than half of you," and went right back to rowing. Crews were a patchwork of backgrounds: runaway monks, failed poets, ex-knights, cooks with short tempers, and even the occasional noble who'd been disinherited and decided, why not rob people instead? What united them wasn't criminal instinct. It was freedom. At sea, no one cared who your father was, just whether you could keep the sail from catching fire. The recruitment process was informal. Sometimes pirates invited new members after a raid, offering survivors a chance to join instead of walking the plank. Other times, a captain simply posted a notice in a tavern, seeking men of courage and low standards. Apply at dusk. Bring boots. Once aboard, new pirates were initiated. No official ceremony, just a mix of rude jokes, hazing, and maybe a stolen pastry. They were taught the ropes, literally. Shown how to patch sails, hide knives in boots, and avoid the angry parrot that lived below deck and only responded to insults. Some adapted well, others cracked. One recruit reportedly jumped overboard 3 days in, convinced a sea witch was whispering to him through the mast. Turned out it was just a bored crewman hiding in a barrel and making spooky noises for fun. Pirate ships, as strange as it sounds, had structure. There was a captain elected and replaceable, a quartermaster who kept track of plunder, sometimes even a designated music man whose job was to play songs during rowing sessions. Pirate HR, if you will. Life wasn't easy, but it was freer than anything on land. No taxes, no lords. No one to bow to except maybe that angry parrot. And the lure of wealth was always there. Every raid, every gamble, every mad dash into danger might yield a pile of silver or silk or most exciting of all spices. Pepper was worth more than gold. Cinnamon could make a man rich. One pirate claimed he tasted saffron once and saw heaven for a moment. Of course, wealth rarely lasted. Coins vanished into taverns. Silks became shirts. Jewels were traded for rum. But for a little while, they lived like kings. Soggy, smelly kings with bad teeth, but kings nonetheless. So the next time you imagine a pirate setting sail with dreams of villainy in his heart, Picture instead someone like Tobin, a man with cracked boots, a grudge against taxes, and just enough reckless hope to believe the sea might treat him better than land ever did. Pirates weren't just chaotic marauders. They had their own set of rules and customs that might surprise you. Think of it as a pirate constitution, a loose but real agreement that kept the crew from tearing each other apart. In a world where law meant little, this code was their law. Most pirate crews operated under a code of conduct agreed upon before setting sail. It was usually written down, signed by all, and often read aloud when dividing loot. These codes varied, but some rules appeared again and again, like pirate universal truths. For instance, shares of loot were strictly regulated. The captain might get 2 shares, the quartermaster 1.5, but everyone else got equal parts. This might sound fair, but it meant no captain could hoard treasure like a dragon on a pile of gold. In fact, the democratic nature of pirate crews was so radical, it scared many medieval rulers. Injuries were also accounted for. Lose a limb? You got compensation, usually a few extra shares, or a purse of coins. Pirates saw this as essential. After all, a crew without arms or legs isn't much use on a rolling deck. It was early workers' compensation, medieval style. Some codes forbade stealing from the crew or fighting below deck. Disputes were settled by elected representatives, or, if things got heated, by a vote. A pirate who broke the code risked punishments ranging from loss of shares to marooning stranded alone on a deserted island with a bottle of water and a rusty knife. Not the kind of retirement plan you want. Pirate discipline was strict, but surprisingly fair. The alternative chaos on the high seas was far worse. And while you might imagine brutal punishments, many crews operated with a surprising level of respect for each other. After all, these men and women depended on each other for survival. In some crews, voting rights extended even to captains themselves. They could be ousted if the crew lost confidence in them. This was unheard of in most medieval navies, where orders came down like thunder from nobility or military caste. Pirate ships had a kind of proto-democracy. Men banded together not just for profit, but for a sense of shared purpose. They had meetings where future targets were discussed, disputes aired, and even disputes resolved over cups of rum and raucous sea shanties. Some pirates even drew up letters of marque official documents from certain rulers, allowing them to attack enemy ships. These privateers blurred the line between lawful naval warfare and piracy. They were, in a way, state-sanctioned pirates, though the distinction was often blurry and political. If caught, pirates faced a grim fate. Public hangings were common, meant to deter others, but this often backfired. The execution of a popular pirate sometimes inspired more to take up the flag, drawn by tales of rebellion and freedom. Pirate life was harsh and often short, but it offered something else too: belonging. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of medieval society, pirate crews were communities. They shared food, danger, stories, and sometimes even heartbreak. The sea was their home, the ship their family, and the code their law. A strange, dangerous, and surprisingly human way of life that thrived amid chaos. And that, in many ways, was the real secret of medieval pirates. Not just their lust for gold, but their fierce commitment to a different kind of order, born not from crowns or castles, but from the rolling, unpredictable waves. In the hush just before dawn, when even the gulls hesitate to call, the line between sailor and pirate could blur in a single muttered prayer or a dropped oar. Many medieval sailors, those same salt-stained men who had spent endless weeks hauling ropes and swabbing decks, found themselves pushed to the brink by skinny rations, merciless captains, and the constant whisper of starvation below decks. It wasn't glory or greed that turned them, it was desperation. Picture this: you're Jonas, a deckhand on the Sea Warden, a royal supply vessel chartered to carry grain to a famine-stricken port. For weeks, the barrels have been light, the water brackish, and the captain's temper worse than a squall. He's taken every quarrel, personally blaming the crew for bad weather, for rats, even for the leaking hull that threatens to sink you all. You've seen men keel over from hunger. You've prayed for a storm, thinking at least the sea would end it quickly. Instead, you're stuck in calm with half-stale biscuits and brittle bones. Then the word spreads below decks. Mutiny. It's not shouted. It's whispered between hammocks, exchanged over chipped mugs of wine. The idea tastes of salt and rebellion. A few brave souls slip into the captain's quarters at midnight, finding his chest brimming with golden florins, a pay he promised but never delivered to you. One of your crewmates pockets a handful of coins, pressing them into your calloused palm. "We deserve that," he says, voice barely above the creak of the ship. By first light, ropes are cut, chains undone, and the Sea Warden is no longer the king's vessel. It's yours. The captain and his officers find themselves disarmed on the wet planks, staring in disbelief at the men who once scurried before their boots. There's no grand speech, no dramatic flourish. Just a replacement of flags. The red cross of the crown is folded away, and a rough-hewn black banner patched from old sails snaps defiantly above the mast. At that moment, you're not mutineers anymore. You're pirates. But becoming a pirate captain isn't like stepping into a uniform. There's no manual. You and your companions know how to navigate, how to fight, how to tie a rope, but you've never governed yourselves. So you hold a vote yes, actual democracy on the high seas. Should you sail to the nearest port and sell the grain for honest coin? Should you head for known pirate hideouts? Should you hunt merchant brigs? After a heated debate, voices rising like the roar of the ocean, you agree. If you're going down, you'll go down with enough bags of silver to keep you fed for a year. Almost overnight, your ragged crew transforms. Worn-out uniforms are ripped into sashes. Leather boots are traded for boots that fit. Weapons are sharpened. The cook, once happy to ladle watery stew, suddenly becomes a prized ally, for no pirate crew can survive without decent food. Even the cabin boy, who used to carry messages, now learns to aim a crossbow. The mood changes from grim resignation to something fierce, an echo of hope carried on every gust of wind. Yet mutineers turned pirates face fresh challenges. You lack a haven to sell your stolen grain without raising alarms. You have no network of contacts who can fence your goods. You have the King's Navy on your heels, eager to reclaim runaway sailors and hang them for treason. And most perilous of all, you must feed your crew. The first thought of raiding a merchant ship fills everyone with adrenaline and dread. Their first target is an unescorted Flemish grain transport. At dawn, you lay in wait behind a rocky crag, the sea still and gray. When the merchant sails into view, you row silently, hearts pounding. You remember the cramped hours aboard the Sea Warden, how each groaning plank felt beneath your knees, how the captain's feverish glare burned through your sleep. That memory steels your resolve. Boarding goes smoothly. The traders offer no resistance. You seize their sacks of grain and silver coins. You spare their lives for now, but the smug relief in their eyes only confirms what you've already decided. You cannot return to being sailors. The taste of freedom is too bittersweet to ever rinse away. Over the next weeks, your crew earns a fearsome reputation. Word spreads of a black-flagged vessel that targets supply ships, stealing only what's needed, sometimes leaving behind barrels of fish in place of grain, as if to temper cruelty with mercy. Some say you leave notes. Thanks for the food. Next time, lock your hatches. It's the piratical courtesy noted in the tomes of pirate lore. Equal parts humor and menace. Yet piracy isn't simply plunder. The shift from sailor to pirate forces you into new roles: diplomat, judge, quartermaster. When two crew members argue over a share of coins, It falls upon you, once a lowly deckhand, to preside. You remember the code of conduct you read about in a dusty port book. The captain gets 2 shares, quartermaster 1.5, the rest equal. You enforce it, knowing that without order, anarchy would tear you apart faster than any naval boarding party. At night, gathered under the black flag, you pass around a jug of wine and swap stories. The cook recounts how he once burned a stew so badly it sparked a panic, nearly capsizing a ship in mid-storm. The riggers boast of scaling the mast faster than any royal sailor. It's in these moments, between laughter and the slap of waves on hull, that the weight of your mutiny truly settles. You are now outlaws in the eyes of every crown, with no turning back. The hardest trials come when the Navy finally confronts you. A squadron blocks your path, flags snapping in the wind like thunder rolling across the sea. You recall the panic of the Sea Warden's crew when you first mutinied, that frenzied moment when survival overtook duty. Now you issue orders with the same urgency. Crossbows are loaded, firepots readied. The black banner flutters defiantly. The clash is swift. Smoke curls across the water. You feel a bolt graze your arm, no time to bleed out. You hurl a grappling hook and swing aboard the lead ship. The boarding is brutal. Clashing steel, shouted curses, the sea spraying in every direction. But your crew fights with a unity born of shared desperation and triumph. They know each other's weaknesses, who's seasick, who's hungry, who's determined. They pull together. You win. When the smoke clears, the royal captain lies bound, staring up in disbelief. You nod and release him. Feed your men properly. You tell him, maybe they won't join us next time. Then you sail away, the taste of victory and shame mingling on your tongue like brine and wine. Back on deck, as you count the spoils barrels of salted meat, wool bales, a chest of coins, you realize that mutiny was only the beginning. Sailing under a black banner means constant peril, betrayal, storms, hunger, and the ever-present hangman's noose. But it also means autonomy, camaraderie, and the wild certainty that you, not some distant lord, command your fate. As the sun dips, you and your crew gather at the bow, watching the horizon glow. The black flag flutters above, a symbol of everything you've thrown off and everything you've embraced. You think of the Sea Warden, the cramped below decks, and the day you chose rebellion over neglect. You feel, for the first time, fully alive. And in that moment, drifting on the waves between past and future, you understand why so many sailors became pirates. Not for mythic treasure, but for the simple promise of control over your own destiny. Even in a world as vast and uncontrollable as the sea. Even on the roughest seaways, life aboard a medieval vessel could be full of surprises, and not all of them involved swinging swords or flying firepots. Some of the most memorable moments came from unexpected companions. Women who defied convention, merchants who knew far more about diplomacy than weaponry, and believe it or not, a certain goose named Alda. Picture a brisk morning on the deck of the Azure Mistral. The waves are crisp against the hull, and the wind rattles the sails like an impatient guest. The crew shuffles about, hauling in ropes and checking for leaks. And there, standing at the rail, is Lady Rosamond of Hunstanton, dressed in a simple tunic, her hair tied back with a crimson ribbon. Most of the crew cranes their necks, half expecting a noblewoman in lace and silk. Instead, they find a determined figure who can tie a bowline faster than any sailor on board, and can outdrink half their number without tipping over. Lady Rosamond didn't come aboard for fun. She was the daughter of a coastal baron, sent by her family to negotiate a grain contract in a distant port. But when her merchant ship was attacked by pirates, she seized a boarding axe, leapt onto the raiders' deck, and convinced them, through a mix of fierce glare and the promise of ransom, to release her crew and serve her a proper breakfast. Impressed by her grit, the pirate captain offered her a place among them until she could secure safe passage. Reluctantly, she agreed, partly to protect her men, partly because she rather enjoyed giving orders for once. Meanwhile, down in the galley, Marin, the official merchant liaison from Flanders, is calmly balancing ledgers while the rest of the crew scurries like crabs in a bucket. Merchants rarely got a taste for sea life. The constant roll, the smell of salted fish, and the endless drip of seawater into barrels were enough to send them into fits of vertigo. Yet Marin's stooped shoulders and spectacles slipping down his nose had adapted better than anyone expected. His secret? He carried a small satchel of spiced biscuits that he traded for fish with local fishermen at every port, keeping his stomach and morale steady. At first, the sailors teased him for his meticulous notes and careful calculations. But when he predicted a sudden change in the wind that saved the ship from being driven onto hidden rocks, the teasing stopped. From then on, his spreadsheets became as valuable as the sharpest cutlass. Above decks, Lady Rosamond drilled the crew in weapons practice, her silhouette framed by billowing sails. She taught them how to brace a boarding plank, how to swing a cavalry saber sideways, and how to shout effectively, because she insisted, a proper battle cry can rattle an enemy's teeth loose. On calm nights, she read aloud from her favorite romances, softening the mood with tales of star-crossed lovers and daring escapes. Her gentle humor reminded the crew that beneath their calloused exteriors, they were humans craving stories, not just spoils. Yet perhaps the most peculiar member of this floating household was Alda, the white goose with one blue eye and one brown. She belonged to Marin, who'd rescued her from a coastal market stall where she was slated for stew. Alda quickly became a mascot waddling alongside the sailors, honking in disapproval whenever someone dropped their supper over the rail, and occasionally nibbling at Lady Rosamond's ribbon if she wasn't looking. Alda's antics were legendary. During a tense moment in a raid 2 nights ago, she had flapped her wings so vigorously that she knocked a pirate's helmet off, causing him to stumble backward into a barrel of brine. The ensuing commotion gave the Azure Mistral's crew just enough confusion to seize the enemy helm. The pirate later swore that the goose was a sea witch in feathers. The crew raised a mug to Alda that night, chanting her name like a battle cry of its own. But life with such diverse company wasn't always seamless. When Lady Rosamond insisted on teaching Alda basic drills, a line, halt, peck, repeat, the goose responded by honking defiantly and fleeing to Marin's quarters, where she hid among the parchment until dawn. Marin, already protective of his balance of herbs and biscuits, had to promise Alda an extra ration of oats to lure her out. That night, the mission to reclaim the ship's flagship lantern was delayed because the goose simply refused to relocate. Amid these quirks, the Azure Mistral sailed on toward richer waters. At one small port, local fishermen gawked at Lady Rosamond's sword technique, then offered her rare smoked eel in exchange for a lesson on net mending. At the next, Marin's biscuits became a sought-after commodity, used to negotiate lower docking fees and better rates on fresh produce. And Alda ... Well, Alda became the heart of the ship, her presence, a constant reminder that even in the harsh world of medieval sea travel, there was room for absurdity and affection. The dynamic between these unlikely mariners taught the crew valuable lessons. That strength comes in many forms. That knowledge can be as potent as steel, and that sometimes a goose can be the most formidable ally of all. Aboard this vessel, hierarchy was fluid. When a storm struck, Lady Rosamond did not hesitate to join the deckhands in reefing the sails. When illness swept through the crew, Marin organized patient logs and rationed medicinal herbs with gentle precision. And when morale waned, Alda waddled into the galley, flapped her wings, and reminded them that life, no matter how dire, deserved a honk of celebration. As the Azure Mistral cut through silver waves beneath a sky painted in soft peach and lavender, the crew gathered for their nightly watch. Lady Rosamond leaned against the rail. Marin adjusted his spectacles while reading the stars, and Alda preened herself by the lantern. The sea whispered against the hull, sending a comforting lullaby through the timbers. They were pirates, sailors, merchants, and even a noblewoman, united by the endless horizon and the shared knowledge that each brought something irreplaceable to their floating microcosm. They had faced storms, skirmishes, hunger, and homesickness, and had emerged not just as survivors, but as a family of misfits bound by salt and laughter. And in that moment, as the moon's pale light turned the ocean to glass, they knew that no matter where the tides took them next, whether toward pirate hideouts, bustling ports, or uncharted coves, their greatest treasure was this mosaic of unlikely companions. For amid the creaking ropes and the endless sea, they discovered that the truest strength lay in their differences, and the sweetest comfort in the soft honk of a goose named Alda. In the hushed lull between tides, tales of legendary showdowns circulated in every port tavern tales, not just of clashing ships, but of two personalities so fierce they became avatars of their side, the pirate lord and the naval commander. These duels were less about fleets and more about pride, reputation, and a stubborn refusal to blink. One such feud began when Baron Etienne Ironhook Moreau, a French noble turned pirate, captured a small royal sloop on a misty morning. Moreau had lost his estate over a gambling debt, and rather than beg mercy, had forged a new life raiding coastal villages. He wore a gleaming hook in place of his left hand, hence the name, and moved with surprising grace, like a dancer with a metal extension. His eyes, dark and calculating, missed nothing. Word of Ironhook's audacious raid landed on the desk of Sir Gideon Harcourt, England's most relentless naval commander. Harcourt was a lean man with salt-streaked hair, known for pacing like a caged wolf and barking orders that echoed off sandstone walls. He had sworn an oath to safeguard the crown's shipping lanes and considered every pirate an insult to his honor. When he heard Ironhook had taken not only cargo, but also insulted Harcourt's personal courier, he vowed to hunt Moreau down. The chase that followed was part cat and mouse, part chess match played on the high seas. Harcourt's flagship, the Valiant Dawn, was a sturdy vessel with a crew as disciplined as clockwork. Moreau's ship, the Crimson Corsair, was smaller, faster, and rigged for raids rather than line battles. Each time Harcourt's squadron drew near, Ironhook slipped away through narrow inlets or under the cover of fog, leaving only a mocking pennant fluttering in his wake. At one point, Harcourt tried a bold feigned surrender, sending a single boat with half-masted flags and an officer bearing white gloves. The message read, "Let us parley, noble pirate. I tire of this chase." Moreau, amused, allowed the envoy aboard, only to have his favorite brass telescope, gift from his late brother, snatched away when he leaned over the rail. Harcourt's men rowed back, brandishing the telescope like a trophy. The insult added fuel to their feud. Now both sought not just victory, but vengeance. Months passed. Letters reached both sides, carried by daring merchants or cast in barrels at sea, taunting each other. Harcourt teased that Ironhook was all hook, no heart. Moreau retorted that Harcourt's beard was more suitable for a cheesecloth than a commander. The sea itself seemed to crackle with anticipation, as though aware that the final confrontation must come. That moment arrived off a rocky shoal near Brittany on an autumn dawn. The mist lay thick, the water a slate-gray mirror. Harcourt's fleet formed a semicircle, engines silent, stars still fading. From the murk emerged the Crimson Corsair, sails black, hook gleaming in the pale light. Moreau waved an almost gentlemanly gesture before, unleashing a volley of firepots that exploded across the Valiant Dawn's bow, sending smoke swirling like a phantom dance. Harcourt's eyes narrowed. "Now," he whispered, and gave the order. The Valiant Dawn surged forward, grappling hooks launched. The two ships collided with a thunderous crunch, each splintering plank a testament to their captain's resolve. As the crews scrambled onto the makeshift plank, Moreau and Harcourt met in the narrow gap, two silhouettes framed by rising smoke. The duel itself was less a sweeping sword fight and more a tight, rhythmic exchange. Ironhook's metal hand clanged against Harcourt's rapier guard. Sparks flew as steel met iron. Every slash, every parry, echoed with the voices of weeks of taunts and defiance. Around them, men yelled, dropped buckets, stumbled, and scraped across the deck. The air smelled of tar, sweat, and heated metal. At one point, Moreau disarmed Harcourt with a swift twist, sending the rapier skittering over the side. Harcourt's eyes flashed. Rather than draw a dagger, he smiled and tapped his palm on Moreau's metal hook. The clang was loud enough to draw every pair of eyes. Then Harcourt drew a small mirror from his belt, the one Moreau had stolen months earlier, and held it up, the pirate's own gaze staring back. "That's for my courier," Harcourt said softly. Moreau's jaw clenched. In a swift move, he raked Harcourt's sleeve with his hook, drawing a thin line of blood. Harcourt merely chuckled and struck Moreau's leather jerkin with the mirror's edge, cutting through the stitches. The duel wore on, a tight dance of offense and defense. Each man knew the other's style by now. Harcourt quick and precise, Moreau unpredictable and bold. Around them, the battle ebbed. Some crew members were already running from the flaming decks back to their ships. Others were locked in their own scraps. Finally, Moreau stumbled, or at least pretended, to letting his hook catch on a loose plank. Harcourt lunged, blade glinting. Time slowed. Moreau twisted, catching Harcourt's blade in the crook of his hook. He held it firm, then smiled a slow, crooked grin. He spat in Harcourt's direction and said, "You win this dance, Sir Knight, but the sea is my home. We shall meet again." Harcourt hesitated, then withdrew his blade. He offered a gaunted hand. Moreau grasped it, and the two men, despite everything, shared a brief clasp of mutual respect. The crews fell silent, then erupted into cheering and jeering all at once. The valiant Don's flag snapped back to full mast. The crimson corsair lowered hers. That single handshake became legend. Some say Harcourt and Moreau later dined together in a tavern near Dover, swapping stories over watered wine. Others insist they never met again, but their feud continued in whispered rumors and graffiti on port walls. This was not an isolated incident. Across the medieval waters, pirate lords and naval commanders locked horns in similar showdowns, each a microcosm of larger conflicts. Crown versus outlaw, duty versus freedom, order versus chaos. They fueled each other's reputations. Every narrow escape, every stolen crate, every insult-laden note added to the legend. And the real prize? Not the cargo, not the spoils. It was the story itself, shared by tired sailors in musty inns, passed from one generation to the next. A bedtime tale of how two stubborn men turned the sea into their personal stage. The ships returned to their normal routines, sails mended, barrels restocked, but the echo of that duel lingered, a reminder that even in the endless expanse of ocean, human rivalry could be as intimate and as dramatic as any landlocked feud. And yes, somewhere beneath those waves, the sea still remembers. It keeps the rhythm of their clash in every swell, in every whispering wind, so that if you listen carefully, you can still hear the clash of hook on rapier, the soft laugh of respect, and the promise that some battles, no matter how epic, are carried forward by stories rather than bodies. When a pirate's luck ran out, the sea didn't swallow them whole instead. They found themselves hauled before judges on land, far from the creaking decks and the comforting slap of waves. Their fates were as varied as the tides. Some languished in dank dungeons, others met the noose, and a few slipped into obscurity so deep, even the sea forgot their names. Picture a captured pirate clattering down a stone stair-iron shackle on one ankle, wooden clogs thudding against cold walls. The air smells of mildew, stale ale, and regrets older than the mortar between the bricks. This wasn't a gilded courtroom. It was a chamber where justice creaked like a loose mast, where bribery flowed freer than water. Some pirates ended up in sea prisons, hulks stripped of sails, anchored in murky harbors. Below deck, prisoners lay on straw bedding, elbow to elbow, sharing every cough and every secret. Rats were the foremen, scurrying across feet and fingers. In one notorious hulk, the cells were so overcrowded that a single bench of plank nailed to the wall served 70 men in 3 shifts. No ropes to swab, no sails to mend, just the endless drip of water and the echo of distant seagulls. Here, time stretched like taffy. A captured privateer once carved notches on his cell wall, 300, 400, as the months crawled by. His final tally was lost when guards used the stone for target practice. He himself vanished shortly after, likely sold off to the galleys or exchanged for ransom. No one knows which. Hanging was the headline punishment at public spectacle, meant to warn those who felt the pull of the black flag. Town squares filled with curious onlookers. Children clutching rags of bread, noble women fanning themselves, and scarred veterans who watched with a mix of fascination and sorrow. The gallows were erected near the docks, so the last thing a pirate saw was the water he once ruled. Yet the hangman's noose was often no quick escape. Medieval ropes stretched and frayed, sometimes choking victims slowly by design to heighten deterrence. One chronicler noted that a pirate named Alwyn wrestled the rope like a cornered cat, buying himself agonizing minutes of life. His final gasp echoed off timber and stone, a grim callback to the sea's own harsh breathing. Some captured pirates received public shaming in lieu of execution. They were paraded through town with placards around their necks. Here walks Gerard the Goat Biter, pirate of the Irish Sea, while townsfolk lobbed rotten turnips and shouted insults. The humiliation was meant to cut deeper than steel. Onlookers claimed Gerard never fully recovered. He spent his final years stammering apologies to goats in nearby fields. For those deemed useful, the crown offered reprieves. Row the king's galleys. Instead of water beneath your feet, it was the oarlock's bite and the stench of sweat. Life aboard a galley was barely an upgrade from the prison hulk. 5 men per oar, nary a sailor's song, and the constant fear of disease. Some seasoned pirates lamented that they'd have rather faced the noose than the endless stroke of the galley bench. A handful managed to escape. In one famous story, a pirate shackled in a coastal dungeon tunneled out using a broken mug and a spoon stolen from a guard's mess. He slipped into the night, crossed the tidal flats, and disappeared. Years later, locals reported sightings of a pale, gray-bearded man offering salted fish at market, a ghost of the sea come ashore to trade one last time. Then there were the strange deaths, the ones that didn't fit the official record. A pirate held in the Tower of London supposedly drank a vial of prison tonic provided by a sympathetic jailer. Some say it was a peace offering of ale. Others insist it was poison. He was found dead at dawn, a smile on his lips and a half-finished letter begging forgiveness from his mother. Another account tells of a pirate convicted in Venice who was bricked into a wall beneath St. Mark's Square. His only company was the pigeons. When the wall cracked decades later, workers found only his skeleton and a wooden flute, still clutched in a bony hand. Whether he died playing a requiem or cursing his captors, no one knows. In some cases, families or former crewmates paid ransoms to secure their release. A wealthy merchant once spared a notorious corsair in exchange for navigation charts and secret hideaway locations. The pirate, fearing betrayal, was released on the condition he never sail those waters again. Break the promise, and the sword awaited. Yet for every dramatic end, countless pirates simply vanished from the records, washed away in paperwork or buried in unmarked graves near abbey walls. These were the forgotten ones. The deckhands, the cooks, the cabin boys pressed into piracy. Their stories faded like footprints in sand, leaving only flickers in court logs and the occasional tavern whisper. The psychological toll on those who survived was immense. One former pirate, after decades in prison, was released as an old man. He returned to his hometown only to find his family gone, his home occupied, and his name a stain on the local gossip. He spent his final days wandering the docks, tracing the hulls of ships he could never board again. Despite the grim outcomes, some captured pirates turned their experiences into cautionary tailies warnings whispered to eager recruits in dimly lit taverns. If you value breath, keep your toes off the plank, they'd say, voice low. If you value freedom, keep both eyes on the horizon. These stories lived on, reshaped into legends that colored every sailor's dream of fortune. And so, when the sea claimed countless lives in its own mysterious way, the shore demanded its pound of flesh. Captured pirates faced dungeons, death, or droll fates no playwright would dare imagine. Their end was rarely epic. It was bureaucratic, brutal, and deeply human. Still, even in that darkness, there were flickers of the old camaraderie. Guards who shared a flask with prisoners, chaplains who read psalms under dim candlelight, and the odd jailer who smuggled in bread crusts. In the hush of a stone cell, men who once roared with laughter on deck whispered prayers, and sometimes dreams of open sea and the taste of salt on their tongues. And as you drift toward sleep, remember, for every pirate whose name echoes in storybooks, dozens more lie silent beneath moss-grown stones, their voices absorbed into the earth. The sea may have forgotten them, but occasionally, if you listen between the waves, you can hear the faint rattle of shackles and the soft echo of a life that once fought, fled, and floundered in search of a horizon just beyond reach. As the years stretched on, whispered sea tailies grew taller, and reality blurred with fancy transforming cramped skirmishes and soggy plunders into swashbuckling legends. What began as a battered boarding plank and a handful of stolen spices became ghost ships, sea monsters, and buried treasures marked on tattered maps. In this chapter, we unravel how real medieval battles spawned the myths that lulled children and insomniacs into dreams of spectral sails. Remember that goat incident in Section 4, when a stray animal toppled barrels of firepots and set a ship ablaze? In later retellings, it became a demon goat with flaming horns, charging across decks and scorning all who dared to fight it. Dockside raconteurs added that its bleach shattered glass, though no eyewitness ever mentioned broken windows. Still, by candlelit hearths, the story grew more colorful. They said its horns glowed green at midnight, guiding lost ships to rocky shoals. Similarly, the quiet pirate raid of the Elder Moon in Section 7 more, like a polite burglary and a clash of titans, was recast as a thunderous attack. Bards spoke of crashing waves that hurled ships skyward and swords that sang in midair. Every mundane detail swelled. The stolen cheese became a wheel of golden luminescence, and the ransom note about soap transformed into a blood-stained decree demanding souls. People love patterns, and the sea offered a stage for grand narratives. When two ships collided and hooks flew across the gap, storytellers added mermaids singing to the wind, luring sailors off course. A single bolt of lightning in a real engagement became a spectral signal from Neptune himself, or a bad day from a vengeful sea witch. Medieval poets penned verses about ghostly oars rowing in perfect silence, crewed by sailors long dead. Take the tale of the Black Lantern, a fishing vessel that accidentally boarded a pirate galley one foggy night. The pirate crew, more curious than hostile, invited the poor fishermen to share their biscuits as an icebreaker. But gossip morphed the meeting into a midnight massacre, by candlelight so eerie it drained color from the sky. No one questioned how candles could cast no shadow. The myth fit the mold of fear and wonder. These stories also borrowed details from one another. A stranded goat became a kraken's cousin. A fearsome hook-handed lord from Section 12 grew into a literal sea monster, its iron limbs smashing ships. The feast of preserved fish mentioned back in Section 3 turned into a miraculous banquet, conjured by pirate sorcerers to keep unruly crews loyal. Maps, too, joined the myth-making. A routine navigation chart with shoals and reefs was found, with an X scrawled in the corner. Here lies the cursed treasure of Baron Ironhook. Merchants began selling fake maps printed on papyrus, dripping them in aged tea and smudging notes in Latin. Here sirens whisper to lost souls. Tourists, an early breed of curious travelers, paid dreamers with mist in their eyes to copy these documents, hoping for a glimpse of gold. Even place names evolved. A nondescript inlet once used by pirates for a quick hideout was christened Devil's Mouth. Nearby rocks, called Black Teeth by fishermen, became Fangs of the Abyss. Local guides, often descendants of smugglers, told enthralled visitors of chained ghosts, cabin boy tricksters, and sea foam that glowed when the moon was blood red. Oral tradition had currency. Sea shanties stretched to include lines about sharks as big as houses and mermaids who traded babies for compasses. A simple rowing chant about the tide's change became a 4-part ballad with a chorus of drowned sailors lamenting their fate. Mother used to sing a lullaby. Guard your dreams from watery graves, for villains lurk where seaweed waves. She probably learned it from her mother, who may have learned it from someone who heard it in a tavern once, and thus the legend was sealed. Writers seized on these myths in poems and pamphlets, early tabloids, sensationalizing every rumor. Rumors of cannibal pirates feasting on prisoners after a fortnight at sea were printed without question, even though surviving logs in Section 9 noted that most raiders simply traded for salted pork. The more grotesque accounts sold better. Pamphleteers added illustrations of skeletal crews hoisting skull-topped masts. And yet, amid exaggeration, kernels of truth remained. That goat really did topple barrels. Those maps really did guide ships, sometimes into disaster. The code of conduct from Section 9 did exist, and some pirates did treat captives with unexpected mercy. But these ordinary facts slipped into the shadows, overshadowed by dragons and sea phantoms. By the 15th century, the line between fact and fable blurred entirely. Travelers arriving in port expected tales of blood-red tides and glowing brands on captured ships. Merchants catered to this appetite, selling trinkets carved with krakens and bottled sea breeze that smelled faintly of vinegar and salt. Even midwives borrowed sea mythology, warning expectant mothers that sirens would lull newborns into eternal sleep if not protected by coral amulets. When Victorian antiquarians finally sifted through dusty records, they found a melding of diaries, court logs, and hearsay snippets that clashed wildly. One record praised Pirate Lord Moreau for his fairness. Another accused him of summoning storms with incantations. One council decree apologized for falsely condemning a pirate who turned out to be a noble runaway. There were more contradictions than agreements. But perhaps that's the point. The sea has always been a canvas for human imagination, vast, unknowable, and whispering secrets we hunger to believe. Medieval battles between sailors and pirates laid the groundwork, offering sparks of drama that storytellers fanned into roaring bonfires of myth. From goats to ghosts, from stolen cheese to cursed maps, every ordinary event grew a fantastical tale-loop's tale. So next time you drift off imagining ghost ships, remember the creaking planks, the dripping ropes, and the one bleeding goat that started it all. Because history, at its heart, is just a story we tell ourselves, one that, through repetition and exaggeration, becomes something far larger than truth. At last, the sails begin to fray, the oars slow their rhythm, and the roar of battle on medieval seas recedes like a tide. For centuries, small coastal skirmishes and daring raids defined piracy's golden age, but as monarchs built stronger navies and trade routes shifted to larger, sturdier ships, the era of hook-wielding buccaneers quietly waned. No grand cataclysmic battle ended this chapter only, a gradual handover, like one crew slipping from the deck to let another climb aboard. Imagine a harbor in the late 15th century, once teeming with pirate tenders and ramshackle trading vessels, where hidden coves once brimmed with black-flagged galleys, now larger merchant cogs and naval caravels docked under the watchful eyes of royal patrols. The old hideout's rocky inlets, marshy lagoons, and overgrown river mouths fell silent as coastal governors erected watchtowers and imposed tolls on every passing ship. Pirates, facing heavier fines and hangings, found it harder to blend with local fishermen or slip into taverns unnoticed. Meanwhile, shipbuilding advanced. Sleeker hulls, multiple decks, and standardized armaments turned small-scale raids into futile gambits. A merchant vessel in the early 1500s carried its own swivel guns and small cannons, tools unheard of when grappling hooks ruled the waves. Pirates who lingered clung to archaic tactics, firepots, boarding planks, and handheld axes. They could still surprise a lone cog, but against a convoy bristling with guns and cannons, they were as outmatched as a knife against a fortress gate. Trade patterns shifted too. The discovery of new sea lanes to India and the Americas lured merchants into oceanic voyages far from medieval hotspots. Coastal raiders lacked the ships, crews, and supplies for these grand circuits. Their world, once defined by narrow seas and sheltered coves, shrank beneath the shadow of global empires. Piracy didn't vanish. It moved on to different waters, new tactics, and evolving legends. Some former pirates adapted, becoming privateers with letters of marque. Sanctioned by crowns, they attacked enemy ships under the guise of naval service. Others turned to smuggling slipping contraband under the noses of customs officials rather than raiding well-armed vessels. A handful retired quietly, accepting pardons in exchange for maps and intelligence. Many, however, ended up in gallows or dungeons, casualties of a world that no longer had room for small-scale rebels. Yet the old pirate era left its marks. Nautical charts from the 14th and 15th centuries began to note Old Pirates Cove or Asterisk, Spider Reef, a name given after a particularly vicious boarding that left nets tangled like spider webs across decks. Lighthouse keepers told stories of brine-stained skeletons found in hidden coves, still clutching rusted blades. Local ballads lamented the end of coastal thrills, mourning the loss of sea raiding not as criminality, but as a raw, unpredictable counterpoint to growing monarchical order. Even today, if you study antique sea charts, you'll spot faded annotations, X's marking hidden sandbars, scribbles of silent approach near narrow inlets, and margin notes about safe houses where wounded raiders might hide. These remnants are echoes of grappling hooks dropped, boarding planks extended, and crews who dared to rewrite their destinies with every lowering of the oars. And yet, for all this faded clamor, the spirit of those medieval battles persists in the rhythm of waves against a weathered hull, in the hush of a fog-cloaked morning, and in the whispered legends passed down from one generation of sailors to the next. The mechanics of piracy have changed, the weapons refined, and the prizes modernized, but the basic dance remains: cunning and courage against the ceaseless sea. So as the last oars fall silent and the old pirate flag is folded away, remember that every carved plank and every stained map is a testament to an era when small crews fought great ships with little more than nettle hooks, firepots, and undaunted hearts. Their battles were as much about asserting humanity against the vast, unknowable ocean as they were about treasure. In surrendering their reign, they handed the sea new chapters written in cannon smoke and steel hulls, but always beginning with that same primal beat, the call to adventure beyond the horizon. Now, dear traveler of tides, close your eyes and let the sea's whisper rock you gently. Picture that final harbor silent, save for the soft creak of a single mast swaying in the breeze. Feel the warmth of early morning light softening weathered wood, and smell the faint tang of salt lingering in the air. The roar of battle has faded. leaving only echoes that drift outward like distant gull cries. Allow your breath to match the slow rhythm of the waves. Inhale calm, exhale tension. Imagine the ocean's vastness stretched before you, a boundless blanket inviting rest rather than danger. Here, there are no orders to shout, no hooks to hurl, no planks to cross, only the smooth lullaby of water against hull, a steady metronome coaxing your mind toward stillness. Trace with your thoughts the journey of those medieval sailors and pirates, their fears and their smiles, their triumphs and their quiet defeats. Know that their stories woven from splinters, smoke, and salt live on in every gentle swell that brushes the shoreline. Let their resolve become your own, a reminder that even amid uncertainty, we find purpose in each breath, each heartbeat, each gentle wave. As night settles, let the pale moonlight guide you deeper into calm. Imagine the sea's cool touch, erasing the day's edges, smoothing every creak in your thoughts. There is no rush, no chase, only the vast softness of dreams waiting beyond the horizon. So rest now, drifting on the sea of sleep. May your dreams be as vast and serene as those medieval waters, carrying you to shores of peaceful slumber. Good night and sweet dreams.